Let me say a special good morning to the entire nation and our sister isles. We talk in Grenada. Good morning, the mainland, our sister isles of Carriacou and PT Martinique. Good morning and welcome to another edition of To The Point. Today being Tuesday, the 25th day of April, within the year 2023. I'm your host, GT. I'm going to be around with you for the next hour. And it's Tuesday, as I mentioned. You know, it's Opposition Tuesday here on To The Point. And usually on the Tuesdays, we do entertain whether it's a particular member of the opposition here in Grenada on the program. So let me say also good morning to our listeners. Those of you via Classic Radio, wherever you're listening to 105.5, 105.9. Good morning to you. Those of you via GBN TV, whether it's Channel 7, Channel 11, or Channels 20. Good morning to you also, and welcome our social media audience, the Facebook page, our YouTube channels. Good morning and welcome, and certainly thanks. I want to say thanks to Innocent for holding in for me yesterday. Thanks, bro, and certainly appreciate that a whole lot. And I do have a special guest on the program with me this morning, and I'm going to go over and say good morning to him, and let's welcome the former, of course, Prime Minister, Dr. Keith Mitchell. Good morning to you. So how you doing this morning? Good morning.
Good morning, my brother, and good, of course, very good, special, rainy, but delightful morning throughout the length and breadth of our country, and good morning to all your listeners.
Certainly welcome. It's a pleasure to have you on the program this morning, and I certainly appreciate you taking the time out to be on To The Point this morning. I have never had a conversation with the former Prime Minister, whether you were in office or the province, so it's like a pleasure having to have a conversation with you this morning. It's such a pleasure to have a conversation with you. How are you doing this morning? How are you doing this morning, sir? How are you doing? Let's get into a small talk, as they would say, before we kick it off.
I'm fine, my friend. I'm fine, doing well, and I think we thank God for this, because every day you get up and you feel physically fine, you have to count your blessing, because some people are getting up not in the best shape physically and otherwise, so we always have to thank God for when we get up feeling on top of the world.
I certainly agree with you on that 100%. Let's get into the conversation this morning. I want to kick it off, and the direction I want to take the conversation is like this morning. Tell us, there's always heard the talk from time to time about your legacy and stuff like that. Let's start from the beginning of Dr. Keith Mitchell's beginning. What was how you decided politics and leadership, and with the lifeline that you have been through it. How has that started for you? How do you feel about the level you're at now with it?
Well, I must say this. Growing up as a young boy in school, primary, secondary schools, and there was never the thought that I would ever be in politics. That was never something that was in my head. But I suppose as you live among people and you have a passion for dealing with people and working with people and empathizing with people. And remember, a lot of this came out through my youthful days playing cricket all over the country. As you know, a former captain of this country's team, playing Windward Island cricket and so on. And I was teaching at secondary schools, and therefore I had a lot of contact at the academic level. So you got a good mix of persons, and growing up in a village and that is considered rural to some extent, and of course, moving around people coming from poor family myself. There was that passion for watching people move from one stage up the ladder, so to speak. So that I would say must be responsible for what happened to me, because as you know, I'm teaching at the university level and doing research and doing business in Washington and so on, certain far away from political life in Grenada. So I think a combination of all of the above may have been responsible for the fact that I'm entrance into politics and the way I have been over the last literally almost 40 years.
Oh. You know, a question that just came to mind that I want to follow up on what I've just asked. In terms of the difficulties, you know, the experiences, the high points, the low points, how has that been for you in your career, sir?
No, it's been tough. We had many times to walk from Happy Hill to St. George's. Um, in those days, when you finish at 5 o'clock after buses leave St. George's at 4 or 5, you literally had to foot it up to Happy Hill. So it was tough. And of course, my father was a farmer. We had to be working in the field, providing support for the animals, the cows, the sheep and things that we had, and therefore we had to get up early in the morning and go feed the cows, get grass and do different things. But that sort of activity sort of molded one growing up, and I suppose my other brothers and sisters went through the same thing. We had to work very hard. We had lands in Mondo, a place way up in the country as far as Grenville Vale, and of course, footing that through stones and bushes and sand. You used to wonder if that's what life is all about, and when am I going to get out of this? So it was a tough life, but in essence, I believe it helped to mold you as a person because you did not have it easy. To a lot of the young people who don't know my history, and that is in my brother, I'm telling you this now because I'm now doing my autobiography, and hopefully before sometime next year we will have that draft finished and therefore ready to go, so people can read about how you went through life. There were no privileges growing up, and it was tough, but it helped to make you tough also. And I think it has a lot to do with being able to meet the challenges of life and make it through. Because sometimes I get the impression that some people believe that life is very easy, you're just getting and move through. It's not always so. For most of us, it was a difficult path, and therefore you have to strengthen yourself in every single way going forward. So I'm happy that my parents instilled that sort of fortitude in us and growing up, and that's why I think most of my brothers and sisters are highly successful people in their own different ways and so on. So that I would think was helpful in many sense.
All right. Let me ask you this. How did changes we're talking about changes in terms of events and so forth over the years. How has that changed your leadership plan over the years? Especially, let's minus COVID. But how have the, event changes over the years has, your leadership plan over the years? How have that made any difference for you?
Well, I think your involvement with people at different levels help to inform you as to some of the things. In other words, decisions that you would have taken 20, 30 years ago, you wouldn't take it today because the country has changed. And the population become younger. The person's initiative and interest has changed dramatically. So that helped to guide you. And I remember when I just got into politics, we had very few parts of the country had electricity, telephone, or water. So as Minister of Infrastructure, all the roads were bad. We had to build roads all throughout the length and breadth of the country. And that gave me, to tell you the truth, a lot of contact with people on the ground, so to speak, because of the absence of basic infrastructure in the country. So at one time, we were just having to turn on electricity almost every village, turn on the telephone system. We were one of the first countries that introduced the digital telephone system in the Caribbean as a whole. We were one of the first countries, we led the whole liberalization of telephone system in the sub-region, in the OECS. I was the chairman of that committee. And of course, water service was, even my own village, as Minister of Water, we had no water. So pipe-borne water, I mean. So consistently so. And all that changes over the years brought you into understanding what life is all about and how people have to move from one stage in their life to the next. So I think all these, I would say, help to to sort of mold my political life. The fact that you had to be involved at so many different levels and have to deal with so many different persons. And of course, coming from an academic institution, you'd be able to understand the technical issues. So, although you have advisors, you also would have an understanding of technical issues coming from the field of mathematics, as you know. That gives you the basic understanding of reasoning, how to deal with issues. That you would always any time be perfect, but certainly it does give you the basic understanding of how you can move from one stage to the next. So it's not been a rose a bed of roses, but it's certainly been a very useful and period as far as my life is concerned, and my period in teaching, in business, and of course in politics.
All right. Let me just switch the conversation slightly here, but it's still going along the same trend that we are at right now. With the onset of the world today, natural events like hurricanes, changing world prices, in terms when I say world, I say world energy prices, climate change, the 2008 world economic crashes and so forth. How has that has that idea have affected you as a leader in terms of making any drastic change that you probably maybe didn't anticipate?
Now, well, it for one, you would know, given the changes in the physical environment, in countries with climate change, that we can have disasters that we are not planned for, and therefore you have to prepare yourself accordingly, not just physically but also mentally and economically, to confront challenges. And as a young boy, I went through in 1955 Hurricane Janet, when our house was flattened, all of us fell on the ground, because those days our houses are very fragile. And I passed through that. Janet was a tough one because it came with a lot of wind and rain. And of course, we went through Hurricane Ivan, and as you remember, my brother, Hurricane Ivan damaged a good portion of the country, the south and the northern part, sorry, the southern part of the country, and a good 3/4 of the country. But the top part of the country, the Satez area and some parts of Grenville, were not hard hit, was not hard hit. But immediately afterwards, Emily came and took that portion and damaged our nutmegs in the northern part of the country and our agricultural sector and our road network. So I always say, what Ivan didn't do, Emily may have been married to Ivan, came and completed the job, so to speak. So we went through this, and then you saw the many hurricane storm surges and destroy roads and bridges over the years, and you had to find resources to do so. Similarly, when COVID-19 came, who on earth, we knew about hurricane, we knew about storm surges, but we knew nothing about a virus that can in fact engulf the entire world, not just Grenada, the entire world. And therefore, all this tells you have to prepare yourself, as I said before, mentally, physically, and also economically. It is in that context, therefore, I do want to mention that when we were negotiating with IMF and World Bank during the period of structural adjustment program, we had them include a clause, what you call a hurricane or disaster clause, for future events, in case there's an event that a lot of the debt that we have, that we have, as all countries will have debts, that there were certain concessions to be given to the country in those times. In fact, Barbados, in negotiating with IMF after the Grenada model, used our model to construct the relationship with the international community, so that they got concessions if there were a disaster going forward. So I'm making all this point to say, these certainly would have changed me, changed all these disasters, change all of us really to some extent. And therefore, going forward, the more we work together as a population, more we look at ways of dealing with fundamental issues, the more successful our country will be. And that is how I'm hoping that we'll continue to move in that direction.
Dr. Mitchell, I wanted to humbly apologize. I should have gotten this in this particular question in on the start of our conversation this morning, but sometimes you get slipped and sidetracked a wee bit. We here at GBN want to extend our condolences to the of course Mr. Cox, former Mr. Cox, and his family, and I'm sure that you may have done so on a personal capacity. Anything you want to say?
I've done so, and been speaking to him up to late last night, and this is a tough time for him, and the loss of a loved one is always a very tough situation. No one can understand your own feelings. I remember losing my father some years ago, and it is a difficult thing, especially if you're very close to that person, as Brother Cox was to his wife Diane. It's difficult, and therefore all of us must show empathy and show a sense of understanding in this very difficult time. So it's a good thing that you're doing so on this program. I think it's important that we do.
All right. So we due for a break. Let's take it. We come back more with the conversation. It's To The Point for today, Tuesday the 25th, folks. We coming right back. Stay with us.
Get ready to experience the ultimate Spice Mass launch 2023 on Friday, April 28th. The Stadium Car Park will be transformed into an electrifying arena of raw talent and energy. Starting at 5:30 p.m., you'll be blown away by the incredible lineup of artists set to grace the stage, including Boise, Terra the Governor, Lil Natty and Thunder, Lava Man, Looney Spark and Electrify, Jab King, Lil Kerry, Lil Jello, Dash, Crave, Mozo, Scala, and many more. But that's not all. Prepare to be amazed by the traditional mass, Moko Jumbies, Jab Jab, Short Knee, and Veko. Plus, your reigning Panorama champs, Co-op and Comancheros, will also be there to add to the excitement. And the best part, it's completely free. The Stadium Car Park is the place to be on Friday, April 28th. Get ready for an epic night that you'll never forget. Spice Mass, the evolution.
This is why I say welcome back to our listeners and viewers this morning here To The Point for today, Tuesday the 25th. And we're speaking with former Prime Minister, Dr. Keith Mitchell. Dr. Mitchell, welcome back.
Well, it's good to be back.
Yes.
I am not really. I just want to tell you this. I'm not seeing you directly. Eh?
Oh, you're not seeing me directly.
See me.
Well,
no, I'm not seeing you.
But it's okay. The folks who are the folks who are viewing and listening are seeing us. So don't
all right, my friend. All right.
Don't worry about it. I want to get into a conversation about stewardship. Is you satisfied with the stewardship of Grenada so far?
You mean under this period of government?
This, yes. In terms of
clearly, there's some serious deficiencies and issues that are confronting the population during this period of leadership. Not that any government in office would be devoid of problems and difficulties, but the question is how this government is dealing and confronting those issues. I think it's the fundamental issues. It's clear that we have a serious economic problem confronting our country at this time. It is fair to say that, as the government itself admitted, that they met a very healthy treasury. I have never been in government at any time in my entire life. A period of service, except to some extent because of our own making in 2018, after our stewardship of 2013 to 2018, when there was literally a reasonable fiscal environment in the country. There have never really been, over the years, been in government. It's tough finding resources to initiate some basic initiatives that you want to do. The question was resources, and most times we had to go to the banks and banks have their rules, and the international community has have its own rules, and therefore you had to give in a lot to get something done. But we, because of our management, the way we managed the country 2013 to 2018, with the support, of course, of the population and the social partners in general, brought us to the point where we could say that when the government came in, this government came in, they themselves say they met a very healthy treasury. And that is a statement that I've never heard any incumbent government made getting into office. And that was in fact the case. The question is, what have they done? They clearly, I believe the stoppage of a lot of major projects, claiming they want to review, has impacted heavily on job creation and, of course, economic activity in the country. That's the right of a government. But the government must understand government is a continuous principle process. And therefore, people elected a government into office. In fact, we are elected with 15 seats. And therefore, a government coming into office, while it has the legal responsibility and right to make changes as they see fit, must not behave as if the government was an illegal institution then, and therefore they have to overturn everything. In any event, by doing so, you may put yourself clearly in a very negative economic position, because you're stopping the movement of activities. And also, you might also be sending the wrong message of how you operate. And therefore, it's affecting economic activity. I don't need to go into all the projects that have been stopped. In fact, even recently, the government was admitting in Parliament the stoppage of the project in Pearls, the cultural center, which there was no logic for doing so, but they had their own logic, which they spelled out, which I clearly disagree totally. So I cost of living, my brother, this is something that we always have to be confronted with, cost of living in the country. But at this time, coming up from COVID-19, the world in general is going through a crisis of increases. But you have to work as individual countries to find ways to stabilize this as much as possible. But we are not hearing or seeing any serious initiative on this government part to confront this, especially in the context of dealing how these increases affect the vulnerable persons in the society, the poor and vulnerable. Now it's clear that there's been no attempt to do this. In fact, the opposite has been done. When you are going to cut $150 from the seed beneficiaries, it's frightening, in my view, with the mindset of anyone that will take a decision of this nature. I could only assume that most of the members of this present government are people that come from communities and villages in the country where poverty prevailed. And they themselves and family might also be a part of that vulnerability. So to sit there and make a decision to remove $150 and want to blame it on the previous government, claiming that the project ended in December. Well, a budget is a budget. The budget is planned for a particular year. You now preparing your budget for the next year. The conditions have worsened. You can't say the conditions are better. Maybe if the conditions were better and or less, cost of living was not increasing rapidly as it's doing, and that you had increasing economic activity and job creation, you may be justified to some extent. Even that I would have some argument over. But in a period where you have most of the situations then, when we had brought it up to the 450, it is now worse. You are now in government. The people removed the NNP government. They say they wanted something new. You are now there to improve their lot. And now you pick it backwards and you remove $150 and trying to justify it and blaming the previous government. Nonsense. When you are given a responsibility, you may refer to the past, but you concentrate heavily on what you are doing, because you are not going to be judged based on what you say about the NMP period in government. You are going to be judged based on your own performance. And that is a problem I'm realizing. So there is a serious issue, a serious disconnect in the country between those who are governing the country and those who are being governed.
Former Prime Minister, let me ask you this. Now, you have spoken a lot about the issue that you have seen thus far with the present administration. Now, knowing with all the problems that the world economies are having and so forth in today's time, what would you have done different?
Well, we were doing a lot differently. we were taking steps to, first of all, to cushion with the vulnerable persons in the society. In other words, we were acting, we are doing things. You recall what we did with respect to electricity cost. When we took certain decisions and we were being blamed and even the present Prime Minister complained that we were affecting the profitability of Grenlec. Now, Grenlec is owned by the people of the country. So if Grenlec is making concessions for the people that owns it, the people are the one receiving the benefits. So I don't know what is the complaint. If the institution, the corporation is making less, but the people are getting more, why are you complaining? So we were doing that. We had taken decisions with many other situations to increase opportunities for people in many areas. The jobs we are creating, you remember, we had a situation where we got $81 million from the British government because of the visit of former Prime Minister of Britain, David Cameron, who came to 2 islands in the region, Grenada and Jamaica. And we got these resources, and we intended to deal with climate change issues with the resources, then do the entire corridor of the Western Main Road project, also the water projects in other parts of the country, in the southern part and other parts. All these were there, you know. Now I understand that we have now lost a good almost 80-90% of that resources because of the lack of understanding of this government. Now again, they're blaming NNP. Now you are in office. Minister Bowen was Minister of Finance and a former Minister of Infrastructure, who's a top engineer and a top technical person. Right? Who's probably,
but Dr. Mitchell, I hope you don't mind if I interject on you here, but the present administration is blaming the lack of implementation from your government may have resulted in the loss.
My friend, man, you can't blame lack of implementation when we were doing it. That's the point I'm making. We were getting things done. So if you want to bring some false data about implementation, nonsense. The fact is people are happy. And if they were happy, they were getting jobs. What are you talking about? You are now there. Are you implementing? What are you implementing? You are stopping projects. You are affecting people's lives. There are less jobs. Look, a businessman told me that recently he put out an ad for a few employees. In a daytime, he got over 250 applications. You know, you see people and many workers on the roads. We were giving jobs to help the vulnerable. People who are farmers would come and do a contract work, and before they go into the farm, so they were able to add value to their income, right? Fishermen who continue to work, some of them will go and do a contract work and then go to do their own profession afterwards. So people had opportunities. So you're asking what we would do, we were doing, and we would do more, right? Because we are creating jobs. Remember, when Ivan came, because of our international connection, I've been a vice president at IDU and sitting regularly in a TRISOM meeting with Prime Minister of Australia, John Howard, and the Prime Minister, the President of the United States, George Bush. When Ivan came, Because of that relationship, George Bush called me and was able to get 50 million US dollars for Grenada's, the biggest aid US had ever given to any country in the Caribbean after a serious disaster. In other words, we were getting things done. But if you want to blame NNP, keep blaming NNP and keep not satisfying the people. The end product will in fact be there. So you ask me what you're doing. I said what we would do. I indicated what we have consistently been doing. The question of, we put a cap on the question of gasoline. We put a cap. Now you remove the cap. Does that? No, what is happening? The prices have gone up. So the busmen are making less money today, right? They're making because we do not have the economic activity that we had in the past. And therefore, what is happening? They have to pay the price of gasoline is higher than it was if the cap was in place. And therefore, you're affecting the busmen, you're affecting the traveling public. And the fact is, what are you doing? What decisions are the government making to aid the less vulnerable in our society? You know, that these are some of, I just mentioned a few for what it's worth, because you asked me the question. So I hope I satisfy.
Dr. Mitchell, let me also ask you this. You made a call for the present Prime Minister to apologize for the statements he made regarding the cabinet conclusion and monies collected through the enemy party office in the south of the island. Talk to us about that.
Well, my friend, let me say this. I can't tell the Prime Minister what to do. If I was his advisor, I would tell him that. What I said is that the Prime Minister made a major mistake, and a Prime Minister should never find himself in that position. We are not perfect human beings. We're subject to errors. I made some too myself. So my feeling is to have gone on a major national address. It was not a chit chat where you get so relaxed, then you get overbalanced and you make certain statements that you wish to withdraw. It was a prepared speech, and the Prime Minister made an accusation against an entire cabinet, or previous cabinet, where he accused us of literally having a conclusion where we were supposed to receive through the Treasury $290,000 US, and only 150 reached the Treasury. Now, I was chairman of the cabinet, so you accuse me and other members of the cabinet, because all the cabinet members, those who don't want to understand that they were also being accused, that's their problem. But I know I was being accused, and most members of the cabinet were being accused, all of us were. Now, you made that statement. You were asked to provide a cabinet conclusion. We know that the cabinet conclusion that he quoted, he stated did not exist. So it is clear that his statement was false and extremely unfortunate. So he was asked to provide the cabinet conclusion. No, up to now he's done. And then it came with some diversionary tactics, providing receipts about how some money, $140,000, entered some account in the South constituency. Well, I'm not the member of the South constituency, and of course, I am not on top of any account in the South that no one does for every single constituency. So even then, if someone gave a donation to a constituent during an election period, the parties, the NNP party, the NDC party, receive millions of dollars of donation from different sources in and outside of the country. So what is a $140,000 donation? But the fact is that money was not meant for the cabinet, for the government of the country. And therefore the Prime Minister should do the most honorable thing. He should have apologized, but that's his problem. I say over and over, I have done it already. I've made mistakes. And I go publicly and apologize. I'm not afraid to do this, because when you're wrong, you're wrong. And since you are not God, it's expected that you would make mistakes and be humble enough to do so.
All right.
It's obvious the Prime Minister may not be humble enough. And I think maybe he has a problem with admitting a mistake. And I think this is going to haunt him, because you cannot and you must not make that kind of allegation against former members, against anybody, not forget about former members, against anybody. And when proven that you are wrong, you refuse to apologize. That is a fundamental problem.
Dr. Mitchell, there's an ongoing consultation going on right now in terms of minimum wage. What's your take on it, sir?
No, I believe that it is okay. It is good. I mean, that is part of our system, that when you're looking at basic changes in wages in the country, that you do have a tripartite arrangement, the government, the private sector, and the trade unions of members who sit in that committee, and data is going to be provided and analyzed, and you have to look at all sides of the coin, my brother, in going forward, because remember, it is said, to every action there is an equal and opposite reaction. That's fundamental physics theory. Now, you may wish, it is all well and good to say, let me raise a wage up to by a certain amount. The question is what impact that will have on job creation in the country, and what impact it will have on business expansion. All this have to be taken. What impact this will have on the fiscal situation in the country. In other words, you have to look at all variables going forward. Right. And therefore, I think there's nothing wrong with the initiative, my brother. The question is how it's done, and the whole analytical process going forward, I think, would be a fundamental thing in coming to a conclusion. So I wish them the best. And certainly, as I said, it's not a bad initiative, but I look forward to the end product.
Another question that I have, because we drew for a break, but I just want to get this one in before we take that break.
Yes.
There's information that's going around about the Minister of MIT regarding a loan from the Grenada Development Bank. If you can, what does the law say about in terms of issuing loans to government ministers? That's part one of this question that I have written here for you. And part two, do you have have you indicated that regional entities have voiced their concerns regarding the operation of the GDB? Yes. What can you share, of course, with those regional entities?
No, first of all, remember, we're all human beings. So while somebody's a minister, somebody, not only minister, but somebody who has very close connection with the incumbent government, doesn't mean that he should not have an opportunity to enhance his own environment, personal or otherwise, but it must not be at the expense of the country. So in other words, I'm not going to say a minister should not be doing this and should not do this, because he has a life too, and he has a family, he has responsibilities and so on. So one has to be very careful in how we approach these things. What I can say is that it appears that the law of the GDB prohibits actual persons who are very close to government operations, not just ministers, from getting large loans from the GDB, so to speak. But even then, with that in mind, what concerns me most, my brother, is the fact that whoever the individual, and I don't believe I see a lot of discussion about the individual who got the loan. Yes, that is a factor, but that's not the major issue. The issue is a bank is a bank. It has policies. It has conditions for a certain amount of resources given to an individual. It has to have backing of assets in case the person reneged on his responsibilities in that area. So therefore, if you are going to give a loan to anybody, whether it's minister who, given the conditions I mentioned already, then that person must show that they have a history of meeting commitments that they have already made. Now, if they have failed in the private capacity to meet debts that they have and have not met them on a few occasions, and even the institutions involved, you owe them for things that they may have given you before, and you fail to meet it. I don't know how, what logic is applied that you go ahead and give them a massive loan from the same government because of the power that you have. I think that is where the issue becomes a fundamental problem for me, because $2+ million is not a little piece of money. And GDB as a bank, traditionally, not even with private sector people, very rarely, if any at all, goes and give people loans of over $2 million plus. GDB traditionally does not normally do that. I'm not saying that it may not never have done it, but I don't remember or recall any such loan during my period of service in government. It is meant because GDB receives money through the government authority from friends, the CDB Bank, the European Development Bank, and the IDB, and so on. And that's where they receive funds. And these monies have to generally be guaranteed by government and therefore have to be repaid. Now, when you give someone who has a limited period of work, for example, the parliament of the country is 5 years, right? The maximum. So in other words, if a loan is given and that person may or may not have a job after 5 years, then you have to rethink. How will that person, now if that person is a big business person and he has only independent resources, also I could understand, because even when he's out of government, in fact, maybe when he's out of government, he's probably better off because he has less to give anybody than he normally would in government. So I'm making the point. I don't know what logic, and I will certainly ask some questions in the parliament, but I want to make it clear. My concern is not about the individual. That's not my major concern. My concern has to be with the process. And I worry about the board of directors of that bank, because we were very careful with the individuals that we placed on those banks, those institutions where resources are given. It's like the CES, the CES program of the Ministry of Finance. We were very careful of the persons that we involve in managing that project, and I'm concerned that that it may not be as well, I would say transparent as it probably would have been and should have been. And I'm making the point all this to say that the government cannot be expected to be perfect. Government cannot be expected to make all decisions right, especially an inexperienced government, but led by an inexperienced prime minister and an inexperienced members of parliament who are now ministers of government. I think that combination makes it even more difficult. But I'm not hitting them on that. I'm hitting on the process, those persons that they place on these boards, and the accountability that they expect from those persons. That is where I think the government, and the government has time. It may wish to relook at some of those actions and do something to change it, and therefore might be able to change the perception of the population going forward.
All right. I was really trying to get a little take from you in terms of you indicated that some of the regional entities have voiced their concerns. What are those regional entities?
Yes. I've been called by friends. Well, of course, I wouldn't name persons, but don't forget, after being involved internationally over the years with international institutions. Remember when I came to Grenada? Before I came, I used to do a lot of consultant services with the IMF and other international institutions in Washington as a professor at Howard University. So I had that international connection, and when I returned home in politics over the years, 23 years as Prime Minister, of course, I had very good connection with the international and regional institutions. And of course, friendly governments that I've worked with over the years and been in contact. So I get information, and I would never certainly compromise the sources of my information.
Former Prime Minister Dr. Mitchell, we also see we may have to forego the break due for process of the reason for time. Now, we see the government auctioning government bonds and so forth. What is your take on such?
No, sometimes the governments do have, and we have done it too, government bonds. And of course, the credibility of the government and the ratings of the government has a lot to do with how your bonds are received and how quick they're taken. So I think the government fiscal management is a key factor going forward. I remember there was a period in which we are in government where things were extremely tight. We owed a lot to the regional, to the local banks. Our overdraft was extremely high. And when we put out a bond in the regional market, sometimes we didn't get a lot of takers. But the times when our fiscal management was intact and that we were doing well economically, and we didn't have hardly any overdraft from the banks, and we did not owe any major monies from our local institutions, then when we put out a bond, it was taken overnight. So managing your economy has a lot to do with how these things are accepted.
All right. Now, what's your take on the composition of some of the statutory boards on island?
Well, we were criticized when we were in government for some of the persons. In fact, there was a feeling that too many persons who appear to have friendly relationships with the government then were on different boards and not enough people. And maybe there were justification for those comments. I wouldn't sit here and say that we were perfect. But it appears now that this government has taken this to another step, much higher, much lower than we were. In fact, in some of the well-known persons who are very close to the government politically are placed in institutions. I'm very concerned, extremely concerned of the composition of the Public Service Commission. I'm very concerned. I know there are serious party hawks in some cases. And I'm not talking about all the members. Those the government has chosen personally. I'm not talking about the recommendation of the Public Workers Union and of course, the other union representation. I'm talking about those government. I'm concerned about that because it has a lot. And what we're noticing, and I think I'm glad you raised this point because the point I wanted to make, there's a tremendous fear within the public service that never existed in my time in government. Workers are being hauled in by the now reconstructed FIU. And by the way, the FIU was lauded by regional security institutions and governments and countries as one of the best FIU in the region because of the personnel that we had in those institutions when we were there in government. But there are changes there, and FIU is calling in workers and threatening them, and also FIU is also calling people and talking about leaks in government and so on. Now, if you are doing right in government, why are you so consumed by leaks? No one has a right to leak private information in government. But why are you so consumed? You never heard me talk about this. Not that people were not bringing out information of actions of government. But if you are doing things that are right, why are you so worried that the public will find out or someone would leak? And I qualified the statement by saying no one has that right to do so. But I find the over preoccupation with leaks is frightening. It takes you back to the period of the revolution. And that was a revolution where people were frightened to even say a word about government. And we know people are being hauled in and jailed without charge or trial and so on. So there was a reason for people to be very fearful because it was a revolutionary government. But we have a democratic government. legitimately elected by the people of the country. And we have never seen this. I was in opposition when in the 1990 NDC government, led by Nicholas Braffett and subsequently by George Brezan. I never saw this. Again in 2008, the Tillman Thomas-led government, in government, I was in opposition. I mean, it clearly were, both of those governments were not very, very aggressive, progressive in terms of getting things done, and therefore they were removed in one term. But we never saw any level of fear. You have the situation in the police service. You have a commissioner, nobody hears from the commissioner of police, as if he's gone dormant. And we've seen certain decisions are being made, and you wonder who is making them and whose name are they being made. This must concern us. We hear about the sending of a tremendous amount of police officers are now retiring because they're fed up with what is taking place in the police force. All these things must concern us. And if you know, security is fundamental for economic development, for the safety of people in a country. So all these things, my friend, must concern us. And I'm raising this. If the government is smart enough, they would listen and make adjustments accordingly. It's not too late, but I'm afraid it's getting very late. And I hope and pray for the country's sake that the government does take a turnaround and do things more in the interest of the people and less about what they perceive to be their own personal interests.
All right. Dr. Mitchell, let me also ask you this. We're strapped for time, and I know there are lots of viewers and listeners out there who may like to ask you a question or two, but let me ask you this. Now, there are talks in the pipeline pertaining to, the sale of government plans, to sell Grenlec. Do you believe this is wise? If not, well, if you, what would you have done different?
No, my friend, I think you know my answer because I have spoken out on this numerous times. I don't know if I need to repeat that at all. My position is very clear. Grenlec to me is a national security asset. It's the only company in the country that provides us with electricity. And electricity is a basic and fundamental issue of service in the country. And therefore, selling the Grenlec and selling it on conditions that do not protect the country's security and of course, economic life is quite frightening. The first sale in 94 was a terrible one. It literally was given away. And I think the government then paid a heavy price going into the elections because of that. And similarly, we did everything possible and had to pay, we had to pay, in my view, exorbitantly in attempting to get that surface back in the hands of Grenadians where we could manage our affairs and give concessions or help people when there is a need to do like we did during COVID-19. And therefore, I find it a bit frightening to hear the Prime Minister announcing initially when he just got in that's one of his plans. I'm telling you something. I will not sit by. I will do everything in my power, legally and otherwise, to ensure that the government understand that this is not something. And I hope and pray, unlike what was done in 94, when the trade union did not let its voices be heard based on the posturing of elements within the trade union movement pro the government then. I hope that is not going to be the case today. We should not, when we're making decisions that has historical significance for the country's future, we should not be placing party politics at the head of that equation. I hope and pray there will be a change. I expect to see the citizens of the country letting their voices be heard because this time, if it is sold again, the chances are in in the near future of getting it back in the hands of Grenadians going to be virtually impossible.
Dr. Mitchell, before we entertain callers, there was a program that was brought in by your administration back then. We're talking about the Imani program. Do you believe that the government is doing enough? I know this is a passionate program for you back then. Do you think the government is doing enough for those people under such program?
Well, the government could always do more. And clearly, I think my problem is some of the promises that were made to the young people that will become permanent jobs. And I think that is where I think they were let down badly by the promises that were made, and contract work is illegal and so on, and then you come in and you have more contracts than you have seen than even what existed before. This falsehood is what I think is in governing people's minds more than anything else. I think clearly the government has a responsibility to make changes as it sees fit, but to increase the value of the program. No program, my friend, that any government implemented can be said to be perfect. In fact, that's why as time changes, even with the same government offices, modification or improvements to any initiative of government usually are done. And I don't think that's different at this particular time. So it's not that the government may not be doing something with the program. I honestly believe it's not doing any serious addition to the program, and it's certainly not meeting the promises, as I did advise that the promises they were making could not be met. And unfortunately, they were prepared to tell any amount of things, say any amount of things to get votes. But there's a time when sometimes this come back and haunt you, and it appears that it's haunting the government at this time.
Now, with MNIB being closed down, what is the impact it's having on farmers? Or what are you hearing?
Well, clearly, I mean, any country needs I always said that the founding fathers, the revolution did a lot of major errors in human rights and rights of people and some fundamental problems that they were having in governing the country and so on. But you have to accept the fact the construct of marketing board and the intentions of the marketing board was noble. They were not perfect in their implementation, and as you expected that as time goes on, as I said just earlier on, that you expect some modification to improve on what they were doing. And therefore, over the years, even our government time, the previous two NDC government, I believe we could have done more to straighten that problem. And we have to accept some responsibility, not having done enough to correct the inefficiency and the mismanagement that occurred at the marketing board. So the government taking a look at the marketing board, to me, was important. I would always say that they were correct, but the decision to close without, in my view, a thorough analysis of alternative arrangements and put in place to aid the farmers and to aid the employment of the workers there, I think that's where my fundamental problem exists.
Dr. Mitchell, we're going to entertain a few callers, although we're strapped for time, but we've tried to entertain as much as we can.
Went through a lot. Well, let me tell you this. I plan to be back on your program. I've taken it easy for the last 9-10 months, but I intend to be a lot more vocal on public issues in the coming months and years.
I will certainly appreciate having you anytime, so thank you so much. Yes. Let's go to the phone line. Caller, good morning, and you're welcome. Caller, good morning. Let's see if we get that corrected there. Let me get this in. Caller, good morning, you're welcome.
Good morning.
Good morning.
Can you hear me clearly?
Loud and clear. Go right ahead.
Great. Let me say a pleasant good morning to the former Prime Minister. Prime Minister, this is Terry Forrester. Good to hear you.
I'm hearing the voice, my friend.
I want to make two questions to you. But first of all, you made mention a short while ago about falsehoods. And I just want to say that there were several falsehoods which you alluded to during your discourse so far. But let me get to my two questions. The first one, the David Cameron matter out of Britain, that $40 million loan which your government received. You know it is a fact that when grant monies are not used, the grant falls into what is known as delinquency. And therefore, the time frame for implementation of that loan lapses. You cannot, therefore, blame this government for having lost the $40 million. That is a falsehood. Another falsehood. you made mention about Andy Williams' loan. Is it not true that the said 2-point-something million that you spoke of was approved while your government was in office through the GDB? And is it not true that Mr. Andy Williams, Honorable Andy Williams, only raised $600,000 and that the 2-point-something million was through your administration, not directly, but of course, government has to approve such loans through the GDB, and that it was refinanced. So in fact, what he got was only $600,000. I'm sorry that time does not permit to...
Terry, let me answer the question now, because we're running out of time and you're taking up a lot of time. You're giving a speech, you're not asking a question. But let me make a point. First of all, you're using words loosely. You're talking grant and you're talking loan. It was not a loan. There was a grant. And you obviously do not know the facts. The facts are very simple. The grant was given. COVID-19 came for 2 years. The British government, together with the Caribbean Development Bank, where the money was placed, understood that there were modifications made. Minister Boyne and his team at the Ministry of Finance and Infrastructure in his day had serious discussion how to move forward. That was done, right? It was done, clearly done. But the government came into office after the process. And when the CDB called them to inform them, I have a lot more information, Terry. Terry, you do not have the information. You're talking politically, you're not talking economically and scientifically. You're not talking that. So I'm saying the information is they sent a team up, in my view, and I didn't call anybody's name. You calling an individual name. I did not call anybody's name. In fact, I said, I am not too concerned just about the name of the individual. I'm more concerned about the process. So I'm telling you that this money was lost because the delegation and the contact with the regional institution, when it was done and initiated, was not appropriate. And what they were asked to do, they fell through on it. I have the facts. As I said, I have connections with those institutions. So I don't know what you're talking about. You're talking politically, not otherwise. It's unfortunate that we have transcended into that sort of thing, Terry. It's unfortunate. I can't remember. What was the next point, my friend? What was the next point?
I think he also mentioned about the minister pertaining to the loan, and in terms of other, the loan was actually initiated June.
Clearly not. That's a falsehood. Let me say, I don't work with the GDB bank, but I cannot believe that a bank would go into giving a loan to an individual who have reneged on several other places of responsibility to agreements that they made. I don't believe any such bank, if it was done in my time, it's fundamentally wrong too. I'd say wrong is wrong whether it's under NDC or NNP. Don't make it right if it was done under NNP. Don't make it right or wrong under NDC if that's not the case. I'm talking about a principle, and that is what we should be sticking with. The personality issue is secondary, and I hope we can do so, Brother Terry, in the future.
Dr. Mitchell, we have come to the end of today's program. I want to thank you so much for, of course, sitting in with me this morning. It was a pleasure to have you. As you mentioned, we should be having you sometime again, because you are now saying you'll be coming out more and speaking about issues. So we certainly would love to have you once again. We have gone over time, just so we should have wrapped up at least 5 minutes ago, but under the circumstances. I want to thank you so much, sir, for being with us this morning, speaking about the issues that you spoke about. There was lots more I could have asked, but time doesn't permit. This is like a show we have to do all morning long to get everything out. So thank you once again.
My brother, I'll be with you again, and I want to thank your listeners and to thank Brother Terry and his concern and question raised, and hope if he wants to call me and discuss the issue, I would give him some more information that I would not certainly share publicly.
All right. Thanks once again, Dr. Mitchell, and all the best.
All the best, too. Take care, man.
All right.
All the best.
Hey, folks, that's how we come to the end of To The Point for today. Today, Tuesday, the 25th day of April. Join us again for another edition of To The Point. That certainly will be tomorrow. That's what we say goodbye for today, folks. Have yourself a good one. Be good to yourself and others.